Coming up in our newscast tonight. Efforts to boost the economy continues here in the nation. And leading such campaign is a public-private joint venture between the Gwangju government and Hyundai Motor, which has kicked off. They plan to build an auto factory there, a move that's expected to generate some 10,000 jobs. South Korea's benchmark Kospi starts trading on Thursday with a 0.76% spike from the previous day. The U.S. Federal Reserve, keeping its target interest rate steady, is seen to have influenced the local financial market. The work and contribution of the late Kim Bok-dong as a human rights activist is recognized around the world. Various media outlets highlighted how this survivor of Japan's wartime sex crimes fought until the end to bring justice to victims like her. News Center begins now. It's 8 p.m. here in Korea, live from our studio in Seoul. This is Arirang News Center. Welcome to our program. I'm Daniel Choi. The so-called Gwangju Job project has finally been given the green light. The joint venture between Hyundai Motor and the city government is looked to create employment opportunities and help revitalize the region's economy. Kim Bok-dong has our top story.
The Gwangju City government and Hyundai Motor signed a joint venture deal Thursday, also known as the Gwangju Job project, to build an auto plant in the country's urban center of the southwest. As the top two shareholders of the $629 million project, the city government will invest $53 million and Hyundai Motor $48 million. Hyundai Motor will build mini SUVs from the new plant starting in 2021 with an annual production capacity of 100,000 cars. Plant employees will work 44 hours a week and receive an annual salary of 35 million Korean won, or around $31,000, less than half the average wages earned by Hyundai Motor's unionized workers. The central and city government will provide benefits like public housing and health care. The agreement comes after months of negotiations when Hyundai Motor first proposed the deal last June. According to the deal, collective wage bargaining will not take place until the cumulative output of the new factory reaches 350,000 cars. But a provision was added which states that the details of the future wage negotiation can be discussed between the management and the union if a significant event takes place. The project is expected to create around 10,000 jobs in Gwangju. For Hyundai Motor, it'll mark the first time in more than 2 decades that it's building a plant in Korea, as it has relocated the bulk of its manufacturing operations to countries like China, citing high labor costs at home.
The deal is significant as it's a public-private joint venture aimed at boosting the local economy amid struggling manufacturing sector and high unemployment. But there are still uncertainties as the agreement leaves the door for possible collective wage bargaining that could push up wages and add uncertainties to car production.
At the same time, experts say the deal's focus is largely on the supply side. They say for the joint venture to succeed in the long run, it needs a detailed plan to export the mini SUVs that suit consumers' preferences in the ever-competitive global auto market. Kim Bok-dong, Arirang News.
President Moon Jae-in welcomed that joint investment deal. He pointed out what's called the Gwangju-type jobs will be jobs of better quality and will take the nation closer to the goal of inclusivity.
광주형 일자리는 혁신적 포용국가로 가는 매우 중요한 역사적 전환점이 될 것입니다. 사회적 대타협을 통해 적정 임금을 유지하면서 더 많은 일자리를 만들 수 있다는 것을 증명하게 될 것입니다.
The South Korean leader highlighted the employment opportunities created by the deal will not only prompt job-seeking young adults to return to Gwangju, but also manufacturing facilities that moved overseas to return home. President Moon added the government will actively support other municipalities that want to benchmark models involving an agreement between the local government, labor, management, and the people. Production and facilities investment, the two key indicators that can be used to gauge economic strength, fell here in the nation back in December. South Korea's figure for 2018 as a whole is not that great either. Ko Ryuni help us look beyond the numbers.
According to Statistics Korea on Thursday, the country's overall industrial output and facilities investment both fell in December from the previous month. This marks the second consecutive on-month drop. Production in December edged down by 0.6% compared to the month before, and increased on-year by just 0.3%. The on-month drop was mainly due to a fall in semiconductor production. Overall chip production slumped by 4.5% due to lower demand for DRAM chips from data centers. These centers refer to centralized locations where computing and networking equipment is concentrated for processing large amounts of data. Analysts say the centers are delaying purchases waiting for lower price points. Another ominous sign emerged from the auto industry. Production in South Korea's auto sector plunged by 5.9% due to lower demand for automobile parts. This comes after a decrease in exports. Separate data from Korea Customs Service show the export amount of passenger cars last year dropped by 1.8%. Facilities investment fell 0.4% on-month and 14.5% on-year. The on-month drop mainly came from the machinery sector, as companies pared back their investment in display manufacturing. An economic expert explained what the fall in investment means for the Korean economy.
The fall in investment reflects many companies' bleak outlook on the local economy. It also means that the environment for investment isn't good enough for them. For instance, there are government regulations and a rise in labor costs. And ultimately, the fall in investment will lead to fewer jobs being created.
On a brighter note, consumption rebounded over the same period. Retail sales went up by 0.8% due to a rise in sales of durable goods. For the whole of 2018, industrial production and retail sales increased by 1% and 4.2% respectively. Facilities investment dropped by 4.2%, marking the sharpest decline since 2009 in the aftermath of global financial crisis. Ko Ryuni, Arirang News.
2018 has been a good year for Samsung Electronics, reaching all-time high in sales. But when you look at just the fourth quarter alone, earnings took a sharp dive. Its local rival LG Electronics also released earnings. Here's Kim Ji-yeon with a breakdown of the two tech titans' digits.
Korean tech giant Samsung Electronics says its sales and operating profits both hit a yearly all-time highs in 2018, thanks to a semiconductor boom that lasted until the third quarter last year. But it forecasts weaker earnings for this year on slowing chip demand. On Thursday, the company said its combined sales for 2018 amounted to $219.3 billion, some $2 billion more than its preliminary estimate released earlier in January. Operating profits for 2018 came to nearly $53 billion, which is $0.6 billion less than its earlier estimate, but is still a record high. Its operating profits in the fourth quarter last year were similar to the preliminary estimate of $9.7 billion, which is a 28.7% drop from the previous year. Sales during the October to December period last year were slightly up from the previous estimate at $53.3 billion, a 10.2% drop on year. Samsung said the disappointing Q4 earnings are mainly due to global chip makers adjusting their inventories and its main clients cutting their orders. The company says it expects overall annual earnings to decline this year, although sales of memory products and OLED panels are expected to pick up in the second half. Its memory and processor chips account for more than 70% of overall profit. Meanwhile, operating profits for the company's IT and mobile unit shrunk by around 3.7% on year in Q4 to $1.4 billion, while sales increased 8% to $21 billion. Local rival LG Electronics also posted its earnings report for 2018. Although its mobile unit slumped, the company's home appliances and TV units helped increase operating profits by 9.5% to $2.4 billion for the entirety of last year, while yearly sales remained similar to that of the previous year, surpassing $55 billion. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
After the U.S. Federal Reserve took a dovish stance on its monetary policy, South Korea's benchmark index started strong today. Hong Yu sheds light on how the Fed holding its target interest rate steady influenced the local financial market.
Korea's benchmark Kospi started Thursday's trading with an increase of 0.76% from the previous day at 2,222.88. The main burst continued to stand high through the afternoon until it edged down and closed at 2,204.85. Investors and officials attributed the stable performance to the decision of the Federal Open Market Committee on Wednesday to keep key rates steady. The governor of the Bank of Korea, Lee Ju-yeol, said that changes rooting from the Fed's rate meetings affect the nation's future monetary policy, as well as that of many other foreign markets. He also pointed out that the Fed has said it would best support the economy by being patient and evaluating the outlook before making any future adjustment to policy. After the Fed froze its target interest rate at 2.25 to 2.5% to evaluate the outlook before making any future adjustment to policy, Wall Street saw an increase of the Dow Jones Industrial Average, the S&P 500, and the NASDAQ overnight. Stock analysts explained that the market's preference for risky assets increased as the Fed deleted the phrase point-in-time rate increase in the FOMC statement, and after Jerome Powell also hinted at an early termination of the asset reduction. 홍유, Arirang News.
President Donald Trump claims Washington's relationship with Pyongyang has never been better, but CNN reports there's no progress in denuclearization talks. And according to some sources, there are other angles to this story as well. Lee Ji-won turns the spotlight to the contrasting statements.
The much-anticipated North Korea-U.S. talks held 2 weeks ago in Washington got nowhere on denuclearization, according to sources. This, according to CNN on Wednesday, where a source intimately familiar with the talks said so on North Korean point man Kim Yong-cheol's meetings with both the State Department and the White House. Another source allegedly agreed with the assessment. One of the sources said that the discussions focused entirely on the planning of the second summit between North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and President Donald Trump. Soon after Kim Yong-cheol's meeting with President Trump, the White House announced that the summit will be held in late February. While White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders said they've continued to make progress, CNN reported that Kim is still refusing to make major concessions until the U.S. makes major commitments, namely a peace agreement that formally ends the Korean War. It also said that the U.S. had a difficult time making progress on denuclearization as they were pushing for another summit in such a short time. CNN also backed speculations that Washington's Special Representative for North Korea, Stephen Biegun, will soon hold more preliminary talks with North Korea, and that the talk could be centered on drafting a joint declaration for leaders in February. Meanwhile, a South Korean official familiar with the negotiations said the next 30 days will be critical, where the working-level talks will lead to the Kim-Trump summit and the eventual normalization of ties as well as denuclearization. He told reporters Thursday that the two sides are generally satisfied with the outcome of the recent talks and that Pyongyang and Washington are in the process of narrowing their differences. The official also said North Korea's promise to dismantle its Yongbyon nuclear facility, along with reciprocal measures, will be an important factor in the upcoming talks, and that the U.S. could reward the isolated nation with various returns. These could include setting up a liaison office or declaring an end to the Korean War. The official said for now, Washington is still firm in their stance of relieving sanctions only after denuclearization. Lee Ji-won, Arirang News.
Amid these concerns, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo confirmed the two leaders' meeting will take place by the end of February. In an interview with Fox News on Wednesday, the top diplomat pointed out Washington has already sent a team to an undisclosed area in Asia to lay the foundations for the summit. He expressed hopes this will be a substantial step towards denuclearization on the Korean peninsula and a brighter future for the North Koreans. Vietnam's Da Nang and Hanoi are believed to be considered as potential summit venues. Pompeo highlighted now is the time for Washington to work with Pyongyang to follow through on commitments they made at the first summit. He added Kim told the U.S. is prepared to denuclearize. Seoul and Pyongyang senior officials met today at the Joint Liaison Office in the North Korean border town of Kaesong to discuss their project to modernize and connect their roads. The delegations exchanged road-related technical data and discussed having more inspections of roads in the eastern part of the regime. The two sides inspected North Korea's eastern roads last year, but without any equipment. It's believed that additional surveys may take place soon now that the UN Security Council has waived its sanctions to allow equipment to be brought in for that purpose. The delegations also discussed having North Korean officials make cross-border visits to check out the roads here in the nation. Many are expecting the summit between Pyongyang and Washington to take place next month, which is why lawmakers in the U.S. House of Representatives proposed a bill to send a message to North Korean leader Kim Jong-un before his next meeting with President Trump. For details, let's turn to our Park Ji-won.
A bipartisan group of 8 U.S. lawmakers proposed a bill on Wednesday aiming to preemptively stop the Trump administration from withdrawing U.S. forces from South Korea. The bill, titled the United States and Republic of Korea Alliance Support Act, lays out stricter conditions that would have to be met to justify a withdrawal, something that could tip the balance of power in Northeast Asia. The bill says if the administration decides to reduce the number of U.S. troops to below 22,000, the Secretary of Defense must report to both the House and the Senate the expected impact on North Korea, as well as the expected military and economic impacts on U.S. relations with both South Korea and Japan. The bill also requires the Secretary of Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff to jointly certify to the relevant congressional committees that South Korea is fully capable of defending itself, of deterring any military conflict on the peninsula that would threaten U.S. interests. The lawmakers apparently made the decision in view of the next summit between the North Korean and American leaders, tentatively scheduled for next month.
We think it's important to establish before the next meeting between President Trump and Kim Jong-un that the United States is not about to leave South Korea, at least not before there's transformational progress on the Korean Peninsula. Our presence there has prevented war for more than 60 years. It would be reckless, we think, to abandon this commitment on the basis of paper promises from the North Koreans while they continue to threaten the region with both nuclear and conventional weapons.
The bill was announced a day after a top U.S. intelligence official testified to Congress that North Korea's complete denuclearization seems unlikely. President Trump has already signed a similar defense act restricting any U.S. pullout from South Korea. The bill, signed last August as part of the defense budget, restricts the use of the fund to reduce the number of U.S. forces in South Korea below 22,000, unless the Secretary of Defense certifies that such moves are in line with U.S. interests. This week's new bill would tighten those rules. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Kim Bok-dong, a South Korean survivor of Japan's wartime sex slavery, fought for human rights while demanding reparation from Tokyo until she passed away. News of her death on Monday resonated around the world with various media outlets, highlighting her courage and dedication to bringing justice to victims like her. Park Hee-jun has the full story.
The death of 93-year-old Kim Bok-dong, a victim of sexual slavery by Japan during World War II and later a human rights activist, is also getting attention from outside the country. New York Times wrote that Kim had been a prominent representative of comfort women since the early 1990s and described her as one of the most outspoken, persistent campaigners who helped bring international attention to the issue of wartime sexual slavery. The AP and the Japanese daily, the Mainichi, chronicled her life devoted to justice. They said Kim traveled around the world and participated in weekly demonstrations demanding a sincere apology and compensation from the Japanese government. Reuters and Channel News Asia also covered the story with headlines using Kim's parting words to her fellow activists, "Fight until the end." American broadcaster NBC also reported Kim's death. The executive director of the Korean American Forum of California told NBC that by remembering Kim's courage, women are empowered and activists are a step closer to achieving justice. Julie Tang, a former San Francisco judge and co-chair of the Comfort Women Justice Coalition, said Kim was a legendary historical figure. According to NBC, both groups will hold memorials in California on Sunday to show solidarity in the fight to bring justice to the comfort women. Park Hee-jun, Arirang News.
The divide between political parties widens following the sentencing of Governor Kim Bok-dong. The Democratic Party launched a committee that will look into the ruling to see if there are any contradictions, while the main opposition carried out a protest in front of the presidential office. Kim Min-ji has the latest.
Wrangling between the parties has intensified after the sentencing of Gyeongsangnam-do Province Governor Kim Bok-dong. The ruling Democratic Party, with which Kim is affiliated, launched a special committee on Thursday to deal with the aftermath. The party said the ruling was retaliation for efforts by the ruling party and the government to reform a judiciary plagued by influence peddling.
We will work with lawyers to thoroughly analyze the ruling and see if there are any contradictions, and will also continue to push to reform the judicial branch to curb the abuse of power.
Kim was sentenced on Wednesday to 2 years in prison for colluding with a blogger to manipulate the number of likes on online comments to benefit the Democratic Party ahead of the 2017 presidential election. Kim had been considered a strong possible candidate for the presidency and was a close aide to President Moon Jae-in, having served as a spokesperson during his presidential campaign. As widely expected, the conservative opposition is stepping up its offensive. The Liberty Korea Party held a protest in front of the presidential office, claiming that someone higher up must have known about the online influence campaign and asking whether the presidential office was aware of it.
This was a serious instance of illegal election campaigning that badly damaged our democracy. We cannot help but question the legitimacy of the last presidential election.
The divide among the parties is expected to deepen as Kim filed for an appeal on Thursday, paving way for another long legal battle. The Blue House has remained pretty much tight-lipped on the situation, but warned of stern action if there is any attempt to make an issue out of the presidential election's outcome. Although Kim Bok-dong could still be exonerated, if the higher courts uphold the ruling, Kim will lose his seat as governor. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
The South Korean government imposed a 48-hour nationwide ban on animal movement as of 6 p.m. Thursday local time amid the recent outbreak of foot and mouth disease. The temporary ban will restrict the movement of livestock, including pigs and cows, as well as vehicles that carry animal feed. The government has also ordered a 3-week shutdown of all livestock markets and will thoroughly disinfect nearby roads during that period. The measures follow a suspected third case of foot and mouth disease reported in Gwangju, Chungcheongbuk-do Province earlier today, where 11 cows were reportedly showing symptoms of the virus. The government has dispatched a team to cull the animals, with test results due to be released late Thursday. The government announced plans to privatize the nation's second-largest shipyard, Daewoo Shipbuilding, and marine engineering as part of efforts to boost competitiveness of the struggling shipbuilding sector. At a ministerial-level meeting, Finance Chief Hong Nam-gi said the state-run Korea Development Bank, which holds a majority 55.7% stake in Daewoo Shipbuilding, plans to sell its share to Hyundai Heavy Industries. With the takeover, the local shipbuilding industry, which is undergoing restructuring, is expected to be dominated by Hyundai Heavy and Samsung Heavy Industries. A local civic group and a Polish research institute publicized new data and a website to provide information on North Korean society during and after the Korean War. It gives an inside look at the country's history with a focus on the human rights situation in Pyongyang. Yoon Jung-min tells us more.
A South Korean civic group held a briefing on Thursday in Seoul and unveiled the North Korean Archives project, as well as a new website where people can access information on North Korea from the 1950s to the 1990s. The data was collected by secret services of the former communist countries in Central and Eastern Europe, and the Institute of National Remembrance in Poland has decided to publicize them for better awareness of the situation in the North during the Korean War from 1950 to 1953 and beyond.
Both me and co-author of this project, who is at IPN, Mr. Rafał Leszkiewicz, dedicated this project to the young generations of North and South Koreans, interested in the processes of truth-telling, truth-seeking, memorialization, and justice, which we think are irreplaceable components of peace-building measure in society.
The data includes documents and rare photos of post-war North Korea, Poland's reconstruction aid projects in the country, and historical records on the socio-political situation on the peninsula. Also included are records of Korean orphans who were sent to Poland during the war and files related to U.S. and British prisoners of war detained in the North. Last year, the story about the orphans was also unveiled through a documentary film, The Children Gone to Poland, by South Korean actress and director Chu Sang-mi. The civic group hopes that their information can aid victims of human rights violations in the North and seek out historical truth. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
Time to turn to Michelle Bach at the Weather Center for the updates you need. Michelle, it's snowing over on the East Coast along with strong winds.
Yes, and snow will continue to fall throughout the night, and the coast of Gwangju province is expecting the most amount of precipitation with more than 10 centimeters of snow in the next hours. Now, some locations over in the southern provinces are under heavy snow advisory, so take extra precautions when hitting up the roads. And unlike today, Northeast Asian countries will be under a sunny spell tomorrow with comfortable daily highs. But until then, the mercury is expected to drop drastically overnight, so we'll begin the day at -7 degrees Celsius. And the readings will linger between 3 to 7 degrees into the day, with Seoul rising up to 3 degrees. And temperature readings during upcoming Lunar New Year holiday are expected to stay within the seasonal average range, but keep in mind there is nationwide rain in the horizon over on Sunday. I'll leave you with the weather conditions around the world.
That's all we could pack into tonight's edition of Arirang News Center. Wherever you may be tuning in from, thanks for staying with us.